reasons are reasons why these two nominations are extremely important. And, Mr. President, that's why I demanded this debate and these votes. Fundamentally, I demanded this debate, these votes, for two reasons. First of all, I oppose these nominations. I am voting no. There was a UC promulgated, and that UC, had it been accepted, would have meant a yes vote for me. I couldn't vote that way for the reasons I will explain. Secondly, more broadly, I think it's important we have this debate and we have these votes, and this used to be the norm in the U.S. Senate. Between 1994 and 2000, all but two nominations to the Federal Reserve Board were voted on by the U.S. Senate. Yet since 2001, that's flipped for some reason. Since 2001, only two nominees have received votes. 10 nominees were confirmed to the Board of Governors without a recorded vote. I think that's unfortunate, and I think this is the proper way for the Senate to do its business, particularly when such important issues are at stake. Now let's talk about those issues. First of all, monetary policy. The Federal Reserve's primary responsibility, one of its two huge mandates, is to set healthy, proper monetary policy for the United States. Now, personally, I think that should be its only mandate. There are efforts here in the Congress to move the law to that position, but it's certainly a major role of the Federal Reserve and extremely important. What's more, this Federal Reserve under Chairman Bernanke and this economy has set monetary policy in an unprecedented way. And that's not editorializing, that's just a factual assessment, a factual description, because this Federal Reserve has set essentially a zero interest rate policy, an extremely easy money policy for an extended period of time, a very long period of time, without any end in sight, and that has never before happened. There are many experts, economists, commentators who think this is very dangerous policy, and I share their concerns. I don't pretend to be an expert as they are. I don't pretend, quite frankly, to have the economic training and background of Chairman Bernanke and others. But those who do, many of those who do, have grave concerns with this unprecedented easy money policy. Let me just mention a few. Dr. Alan Metzler, professor at Carnegie Mellon, sees signs of this building up future inflation and a weakening dollar, and believes the Fed did great harm in these categories with its quantitative easing 2, so-called QE2. Dr. Metzler has read Fed minutes for years and has written the definitive history of the Fed, and says that the central problem is there is a lack of discussion of alternatives and consequences of their policies. Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City President Thomas Hoenig said the Fed's plan to push down long-term interest rates may produce very adverse accidental outcomes, and policymakers risk creating real imbalances in the economy. He said, quote, "I have real concerns about trying to fine-tune and micromanage the economy when monetary policy is a blunt tool," close quote. Richard Fisher of Dallas said he believes the Federal Reserve's monetary policy has yet to show evidence of working. He's the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas president. He says, in particular, the Fed's plan to buy $400 billion of long-term bonds while selling the same amount of short-term debt is benefiting financiers and not aiding job creation. Philadelphia Fed President Charles Plosser, in a speech on the economic outlook to the Business Leaders Forum at Villanova School of Business, expressed extreme skepticism with that so-called Operation Twist, trading long-term debt for short-term debt. And he really didn't think it would encourage business investment or consumer spending. Quote, "I dissented from these decisions because I believe that they will do little to improve the near-term prospects for economic growth or employment, and they do pose risks," close quote. So there are very legitimate, strong concerns which I share on the current monetary policy of this Federal Reserve. And it is very clear from the statements of these two nominees that these two nominees will support that policy, will support that direction for the foreseeable future, will not provide dissent, will not provide alternative viewpoints. In addition, let me mention three other things about the Fed. As I mentioned, the Fed in general is the primary regulator of the mega banks. And still, I believe we do not have adequate focus and adequate regulation in that category. And I would only point to the recent disastrous announcement of J.P. Morgan Chase. Also, the Fed, with 5 affirmative votes, passes regulations under Dodd-Frank under its authority. That process is ongoing right now. Now, why are these two nominations significant in impacting the development of those Dodd-Frank regulations one way or the other? Well, it's pretty simple. Those Dodd-Frank regulations coming out of the Fed need 5 affirmative votes. Right now, there are 5 members of the Board of Governors, so they need to reach complete unanimity with regard to those regulations. When the negative impact, possible impact of those regulations is such a threat, I think that required unanimity is actually very healthy and a real protection. These two new members of the Fed changed the map, changed the requirement from needing 5 out of 5 to needing 5 out of 7. I think that will significantly push these regulations to the left, if you will, and require and therefore produce less consensus that those with economic viewpoints such as mine would like to see continue. And in the same vein, the Fed is certainly significant, not only regulating the mega banks, but in instances like 2 years ago, bailing out the mega banks. And they have that authority and they have that role. Just as with Dodd-Frank regulations, that requires 5 affirmative votes of the Fed board. Again, right now, before these two confirmations, that would mean 5 out of 5. It would require unanimity. I think that's healthy, actually, with regard to such an extreme measure as huge taxpayer-funded bailouts as we've seen in the last 3 years. If these two new members of the board nominees are confirmed, that math, again, would change in exactly the same way. The requirement would move from 5 out of 5 to 5 out of 7. It would shift the outcome to the left, if you will. It would make it much more likely that the Fed would act sooner to bail out mega banks with taxpayer funds. I have all of these concerns about these nominations. These two nominees are fine, decent men. They're smart. They're qualified in the professional sense. However, they clearly also support the current direction of Chairman Bernanke and the Fed. And for that reason, I cannot support the nominations, and I have real concerns.